Have you ever thought about the invisible layer of software that's basically running the entire global economy right now? Honestly, nobody really wants to talk about it because it sounds so boring. Today, we're tearing down the engine of corporate finance to look at a topic most people think is completely mundane: enterprise resource planning, or ERPs. The general ledger, accounting software. Look, I know it sounds incredibly dry, but stick with me here. What we are actually looking at is secretly ground zero for one of the most astonishing AI revolutions happening in the tech world right now. We're going to explore how a quiet startup called Rillet is literally dismantling the legacy infrastructure of the financial world and rebuilding it from the ground up using artificial intelligence. This isn't just about making bookkeeping a little bit faster, it's about fundamentally changing how businesses understand their own pulse in real time. So, I want to start by throwing a really provocative question your way, and it perfectly highlights this glaring absurdity in the modern business landscape. Why do leading, cutting-edge tech companies take weeks just to figure out how much money they actually made? Think about the sheer paradox of that for a second. You have these companies building artificial general intelligence, they're launching reusable rockets into orbit, writing complex autonomous code, but walk into their finance departments, the whole illusion of the future just shatters. They are downloading enormous CSV files from 5 different platforms, manually matching bank transactions row by row in spreadsheets, and working weekends just to close their books at the end of the month. It makes absolutely no sense that the most critical function of a business, knowing its own financial health, still operates like it's 1998. Well, the core problem comes down to a fundamental architectural difference. It's basically the dumb versus smart ledger. Legacy ERPs, those enormous, expensive systems built decades ago by industry giants, are essentially just passive storage lockers. They rely on batch processing. This means that instead of recording things as they happen, data just gets dumped in all at once at the very end of a period. It is exactly like driving a car by only looking in your rearview mirror. You're making strategic decisions in November based on this foggy picture of what happened in September. Rillet, on the other hand, is built on a totally different foundation. It uses native integrations to pull data continuously, employs AI agents to process it instantly, and pushes towards what they call a zero-day close. It totally replaces that rearview mirror with a real-time high-definition GPS. To really understand how a shift this significant actually happens, we have to look at the founder's story. Nicholas Kopp didn't just wake up one day and decide to build a general ledger out of nowhere. He started his career in the trenches of traditional investment banking before jumping into the fast-paced, hypergrowth world of fintech. He eventually became the US CEO of N26, which is a highly prominent neobank, leading its expansion into the American market. And it was during this time that he experienced the agonizing operational friction of legacy finance systems firsthand. Just imagine running a rapidly expanding bank, processing millions of microtransactions, handling complex currency conversions, dealing with staggering transaction volumes, all while your foundational financial software is just completely choking on the data. Kopp realized a pretty harsh truth about the industry. Legacy ERPs are, at their core, just dumb databases. They store the transactions, sure, but the actual heavy lifting, the real, complex accounting work, was happening entirely outside of the system. It was taking place in these incredibly fragile, monstrous webs of spreadsheets. You know exactly the kind I mean. Those giant Frankensheets where if one intern accidentally deletes a single cell, the entire company's revenue forecast breaks. Despite having a highly skilled, brilliant finance team at his previous company, Kopp found himself constantly waiting 4 to 6 weeks just to get consolidated financial statements. The bottleneck was never the people. It was the fundamental architecture of the software they were being forced to use. So Kopp and his co-founder Stelios Modis decided to build something entirely new. But listen, as anyone who follows the startup world knows, getting a disruptive company off the ground is never just a smooth ride. It is filled with traps. Early on, Rillet made a very specific hiring decision regarding their go-to-market strategy that seemed perfectly logical on paper, almost obvious really, but it backfired so badly that it almost killed their runway entirely. It cost them months of crucial early momentum. I'm going to tell you exactly what that near-fatal mistake was and why it's a vital lesson for any entrepreneur in just a few minutes. So keep that suspended in the back of your mind as we dive into how they actually built the product. Let's pivot over to the technology itself. Kopp and Modis realized really early on that you couldn't just slap a generative AI chatbot on top of a 20-year-old legacy codebase and call it a day. That's what a lot of legacy incumbents try to do, right? They build wrappers. But wrappers break because the underlying data is just a disorganized mess. Instead, Rillet built what is called a smart ledger. This is a database designed from line 1 to automatically structure data at the exact moment it is written into the system. By structuring the data natively, they created an environment where autonomous software agents can actually live and run calculations safely inside the ledger itself. It is a fundamental re-engineering of how financial data is stored and processed, entirely bypassing the need for all that external spreadsheet gymnastics. When you build this out into a functional architecture, it mimics an accountant's authentic workflow, just executed at lightning speed. Step 1 is all about continuous ingestion. The system automatically pulls data via native integrations from tools like your CRM, payroll providers, and corporate bank accounts. Step 2 runs that raw data through Aura AI workflows. These are the intelligent agents. Step 3 is absolutely crucial: human-in-the-loop approval. The AI flags exceptions and suggests journal entries, but a real human accountant reviews and approves them. This isn't about replacing accountants, it's about giving them an Iron Man suit. Finally, in Step 4, the approved data posts to a real-time ledger. It transforms that stressful end-of-month panic into this elegant, continuous, daily loop. Diving a little deeper into that second step, Rillet's Aura AI engine is where the real magic happens. We're not talking about simple, rigid, rule-based macros here. These agents can monitor business feeds to draft complex, autonomous journal entries. They can parse the metadata of transactions to automatically generate prepaid asset and amortization schedules, tedious tasks that used to take hours and hours of manual spreadsheet updates. But perhaps the most fascinating feature is the natural language variance explanation. Imagine an overworks controller on a Friday night trying to figure out why their cloud computing spend suddenly spiked by 20%. Instead of digging through thousands of individual invoice lines, they can literally just ask the system in plain English. The AI instantly traces the discrepancy back to the original source documents and explains it. That is completely game-changing. But of course, whenever we talk about artificial intelligence in the enterprise, we have to address the giant elephant in the room. Finance and accounting teams are incredibly risk-averse, and for very good reason. The stakes are absolute. So how on earth do you stop an AI from hallucinating a catastrophic corporate tax disaster? We have all seen large language models invent facts competently or fail at basic arithmetic. If a marketing AI writes about email, whatever, it's embarrassing. But if your ERP hallucinates revenue, the company faces severe regulatory penalties or worse. So how exactly does a platform built heavily on AI convince hyper-cautious CFOs that it's actually safe to plug into their banking data? Well, the secret lies in a super strict hybrid approach. Rillet doesn't just hand the keys to the kingdom over to an unchecked, probabilistic neural network. They scope the AI down to handle very specific, discrete tasks, like reading the text on an invoice, and they point it only at tightly controlled data tables. But for the heavy lifting, the math, they rely on good old-fashioned deterministic code. Think about it. If you are running a depreciation schedule on a server rack, you need exactly the same mathematical outcome every single time, down to the penny. You cannot have an LLM guessing the math. So AI handles the unstructured messiness at the edges, deterministic code handles the unbending core math, and humans hold the final approval keys. You get the blistering speed of modern automation with the unalterable safety of a traditional audit trail. Okay, remember that near-fatal startup mistake I mentioned earlier? Let's close that loop. When Rillet was first building its go-to-market team, they heavily prioritized deep customer empathy. So they went out and hired former auditors, CPAs, and controllers to lead their early sales efforts. And the logic seems sound, right? Accountants selling to accountants. But it was a costly error. Auditors are inherently cautious, fact-based, and risk-averse. Startup sales, however, requires aggressive pipeline building, handling fierce objections, and driving relentless urgency. These domain experts struggled to navigate modern outbound sales software stacks and the sheer grit required to close early-stage deals. By prioritizing accounting expertise over actual seasoned sales experience, Rillet lost months of vital early runway. It is a powerful reminder that the skills needed to build a product are rarely the same skills needed to sell it. Despite those early hurdles, though, they eventually figured out their go-to-market motion, largely by solving the ultimate objection every single CFO brings to the table: implementation trauma. If you talk to any finance leader, doing a legacy ERP implementation is a terrifying experience. It is famous for taking many months, sometimes extending into years, and costing an absolute fortune in consulting fees, with armies of system integrators practically living in your office. Because Rillet connects natively to modern tech stacks and automates the data mapping using intelligent agents, their implementation timeline drops from years down to just 4 to 8 weeks. They essentially use technology to condense a historically agonizing, multi-year corporate nightmare into a quick, almost plug-and-play onboarding process. And the timing for a technological solution like this honestly couldn't possibly be better, because there is a powerful macroeconomic tailwind pushing this entire industry forward right now. The United States has lost a staggering 340,000 accounting professionals over the last 5 years alone. Veteran accountants are retiring, and way fewer university students are choosing to study the field. Why? Because the work, the endless manual data entry, the grueling late nights during month-end close is just exhausting drudgery. This staggering labor gap means that AI automation in corporate finance isn't just a cool futuristic luxury anymore. For growing companies trying to scale, it is becoming an absolute operational necessity. You simply cannot find the human bodies to do the manual reconciliation work anymore. The real-world impact of this agentic approach is already highly visible out there. We're seeing definitive proof that a company's headcount no longer needs to grow linearly with its revenue. Take Mercor, for example. A company scaling at incredible speeds, they run their entire global finance operation with just 3 people, utilizing a continuous real-time close. Windsurf, another rapidly growing tech entity, manages everything with a remarkably lean 2-person finance team. Postscript, dealing with enormous daily transaction volumes, brought their month-end close down to just 3 days with a tiny, hyper-efficient team. This proves that with the right AI-native infrastructure, the archaic days of hiring a dozen accountants just to keep the lights on are entirely over. We are witnessing a monumental, generational shift in enterprise software. It is totally comparable to the industry shifting from physical on-premise server racks in the basement to the cloud. Nicholas Kopp captured this momentum perfectly when he stated, in 2 to 3 years, every company will run finance this way, agentic and in real time. We are finally moving away from the era where the accounting system was just a static history book, a digital graveyard to store what already happened a month ago. We are entering an era where the general ledger acts as a proactive, intelligent operating layer that works dynamically alongside humans. The software backbone of the economy is finally catching up to the speed of modern business. Which leaves us with one final, fascinating question to ponder. If your highly educated finance team is no longer spending weeks acting as human data routers, if your ERP is no longer just a history book, what will your team build with all their newly freed time? When finance professionals are liberated from the soul-crushing drudgery of manual reconciliations, they can finally become true strategic partners. They can focus on complex modeling, forecasting the future, and guiding strategic investments rather than just desperately auditing the past. It's a profound paradigm shift, and one that every founder, CFO, and tech enthusiast should be paying very close attention to. Keep questioning how the tools you use every single day can be entirely reimagined. Now, let's dive straight into the financial data behind a company that's frankly ripping up the floorboards of the enterprise software landscape. In this explainer, we're unpacking Rillet's financial trajectory and public market prospects. They're an AI-native enterprise resource planning, or ERP, platform aggressively positioning themselves to unseat legacy giants like Oracle NetSuite, SAP, and Workday. So we're going to break down the underlying financials, the capitalization history, and exactly how they're setting the stage for a highly anticipated public market debut. To really grasp the scale of what we're looking at here, you just have to look at their top-line valuation, $1 billion. Yeah, Rillet achieved a staggering unicorn valuation in just over 2 years since its public launch back in August 2024. In the enterprise accounting sector, which, let's be honest, is historically famous for painfully slow adoption and rigid, aging platforms, this velocity of value creation, it's incredibly rare. It signals a massive, massive shift in market sentiment. So, looking at their valuation and financial data, this explosive capitalization is really being driven by a massive migration supercycle. High-growth enterprises are basically abandoning early cloud systems to chase the absolute holy grail of accounting, the real-time, zero-day financial close. Tracking this progression on the capitalization table, the aggressive scaling is just undeniable. Back in May 2025, Sequoia Capital led a Series A that valued the firm at around $118 million. Then, get this, just 12 weeks later, Andreessen Horowitz and Iconic co-led a $70 million Series B. Boom, $500 million valuation. Fast forward to August 2026, Iconic leads a $100 million Series C, crowning them a full-fledged unicorn. I mean, we're talking about a valuation that basically doubled at every single major milestone over an incredibly tight 14-month window. Securing over $209 million in total institutional capital in that kind of time frame is, quite frankly, unheard of for core enterprise accounting. As an investor, you really have to take note here. Venture capitalists aren't just blindly funding an incremental software update, right? They're betting heavily on a fundamental, ground-up architectural shift in how corporate finance actually operates. But zooming in on unit economics and pricing, headline valuations aside, As analysts, we know long-term viability depends entirely on an economic moat. And to sustain this hypergrowth, Rillet has deployed a highly disruptive pricing structure. Think about how legacy ERP models work. They rely heavily on tiered licensing with high per-seat fees, which effectively taxes companies just for scaling up their headcount. Well, Rillet fundamentally upends this entire model. They completely decouple subscription fees from headcount, offering a flat rate based purely on feature complexity. Zero per-seat charges. This radically lowers the total cost of ownership and essentially eliminates the growth penalty for their clients, making unlimited access for cross-functional leaders and auditors a reality. It's a real game changer. Furthermore, their operational edge is just striking. Look, if you've ever survived a legacy ERP migration, you know it's usually a brutal, multi-month ordeal requiring armies of expensive third-party consultants. Rillet brings this implementation time down to just 4 to 6 weeks by utilizing direct automated data ingestion. For CFOs evaluating a switch, reducing business disruption from nearly a year down to mere weeks is an irresistible catalyst. Now let's discuss its potential moving forward, specifically its AI edge and market trends. To really understand why top-tier investors are doubling down here, we've got to look under the hood at the proprietary technology actually driving these accelerated timelines. The commercial traction is, well, undeniable. They've got over 600 active enterprise customers, including notable names like Neuralink, and they're processing over 100 million transactions every single day. Driven by their Aura AI engine, an absolutely incredible 99.7% of standard journal entries are completely automated. That slashes month-end close times by up to 7 days. This is exactly the kind of high-margin operational efficiency that institutional investors absolutely love. And the playground they're operating in is massive. Rillet is actively expanding its total addressable market within the $92.6 billion global ERP industry. They're banking heavily on a generational structural shift. Just as the industry previously moved from on-premise servers to the cloud, Rillet is betting that the next 13% annual growth wave is going to be the massive migration from static cloud databases to active AI-native platforms. The core technical differentiator here is what they call the AI-native general ledger. Simply put, it's an architecture where data flows directly into structured ledger records at the exact moment of ingest. This allows AI agents to act on it with full transaction context immediately, rather than querying an intermediate database. It's a massive departure from legacy competitors who, quite frankly, are mostly just bolting a conversational AI chatbot onto an aging, static database. But looking at the investment risks and challenges, look, no hypergrowth story is without significant friction. To maintain our objective analytical rigor ahead of a potential IPO, we absolutely must examine the bear case here. Make no mistake, deep-pocketed incumbents are aggressively defending their territory. Take Oracle NetSuite, for example. They've publicly dismissed Rillet as merely a limited finance and billing platform. The incumbent argument here is essentially that a narrow, AI-focused footprint simply can't support the complex, multi-entity, and multi-currency supply chain requirements of mature multinationals. And it's a valid concern. Beyond missing critical legacy modules like advanced inventory management and native project accounting, Rillet is fighting a grueling two-front war. On one side, they have to fend off established giants like Sage Intacct, who are routinely out there warning enterprise CFOs about the audit and data residency risks associated with newer AI startups. On the flip side, Rillet has to outmaneuver highly capitalized startup peers like Campfire, who by the way also boasts around $100 million in funding, and Dual Entry. They are all fighting viciously for the exact same mid-market customer base. So, synthesizing these disruptive economics with those intense competitive pressures brings us to the public market prospect, the ultimate question surrounding Rillet's exit horizon. The internal metrics really build a compelling pre-IPO narrative of a company that is rapidly maturing. Their ARR doubles every single quarter leading up to the Series C, and then doubled again in the 3 months prior. That's huge. Crucially, they launched a strategic 2026 alliance with EY for audit controls and successfully secured SOC 1 and SOC 2 Type 2 compliance. By aggressively expanding their customer base into highly regulated sectors like biotech, healthcare, and logistics, they are explicitly signaling to Wall Street that they are cementing their corporate governance for rigorous public scrutiny. So the crucial question we're left with is this: when the S1 eventually drops, how will the street actually price this asset? Will public market investors place a higher premium on the hyper-growth, operational efficiency, and margin expansion of an AI automated ledger? Or will they favor the proven, battle-tested comprehensiveness of legacy ERP giants? It really remains to be seen if the promise of the real-time, zero-day close is enough to completely unseat decades of enterprise entrenchment when the institutional markets finally get their say.